thank peaceful times is not here anymore. So there is a polarization of the world. So we are going to address this issue today. Thank you again for coming here. And I'm going to read now the CV of Ambassador Juul, and then I will give you the floor, Ambassador, to speak 5 minutes, and then I will ask you a question after that. Okay? Ambassador Mona Juul, permanent representative of Norway to the UN between 2019 2033, and President of the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations 2019 to 20. Norwegian Ambassador to the United Kingdom from 2014 to 2019, General Director for Security Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs 2011 to 2014. Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Norway to the UN with the rank of Ambassador. Norwegian Ambassador to Israel from 2001 to 2004, Secretary of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She studied a master's degree in political science from the University of Oslo. She led Norway's successful campaign for a seat on the UN Security Council for the period 2021-2022. This is very important also to say. She played a key role in facilitating the Oslo Accords in the 90s. The secret negotiations organized by Ambassador Juul led to the signing of the peace agreement on September 13, 1993 in Washington, D.C., the first agreement between Israel and Palestine Liberation Organization. And that was very important in those years. Thank you, Ambassador, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador Herman, for those kind words, and not least for inviting me and the embassy and my colleagues from the Norwegian Foreign Ministry here to this fantastic institute of yours. And I'm so happy to see so many of young aspiring diplomats in the here, and because I think and I think I share that view with Jennifer and my other colleague here, that we are all strong believers in diplomacy and the need for more diplomacy in the polarized world, and not less. Because what we see today is unprecedented parallel challenges such as the war in Ukraine, or I think it's better being phrased as the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and of course also war in the Middle East, in Gaza, as we see, as it's playing out. And in such a situation, and where we also have the big power sort of rivalry, and we have the sort of the East-West divide, as we can call it, we also then have what we could maybe call an increasing sort of gap between also the North and the South. And in this situation, as I said, I think countries like Mexico and Norway and others that share sort of the fundamental values and principle that should guide the international rule-based order, it's very important that we address these issues and speak about what can we do in order to ease the tensions and to build bridges between both East and West, but not least also between North and what some will call the global South, which is not probably a term that is the best term to use, because there is not one global South. I mean, there are many countries in the global South with quite different views. But what we are facing is that countries of the South, I think, feels increasingly that they are not represented as well as they should be, that their views are not being presented in the way in the multilateral system, and that we in the West, speaking about Norway, that have this kind of double standards on how we react to conflicts and crises in the world. And then speaking on behalf of Norway, then I think that for us, this is something of an, I was about to say an accusation that we really think we have quite good arguments in countering, because what we have been doing vis-a-vis also the war in Ukraine is that we have very strongly condemned what Russia has been doing there. It's completely unacceptable, the violation of the UN Charter and the international law, this unlawful aggression against Ukraine. The same has Mexico, equally strongly condemned that. At the same time, as Norway, we have also been very clear on telling the Israelis and making sure that also that Israel in this context, even if they have the right to respond to the terrorist attack by Hamas on the 7th of October, their response needs to be within international law, within respecting the humanitarian law, respecting protection of civilians. And I think then that those who say that we are then applying double standards, I don't think they are right in that respect. But what we want to do is to reach out to those countries and to listen to their concern, because we understand that conflicts are being perceived differently, because it's all about every country's interests, and countries need to relate to conflicts in the way that is make sense for them and for their national interest. But at the same time, we feel very strongly that we need to rally around some fundamental principles of a rule-based order in this polarized world. And in that situation, our joint efforts, as we have seen with working together with Mexico, as the ambassador referred to, 2 years sitting together in the Security Council, that was sort of our main task, to protect the rule-based world order, to speak out on violations, to protect human rights, to speak on the need for gender equality, to speak about a more just distribution of the wealth in the world. And in this respect also, we think that countries saying that this world order that is now in place it is a lot of malfunctioning of this order. That's why we need to rally around the need for reform, being it of the Security Council, being it of the international financial institution, being of the UN in general. I mean, there is a need for reform, but we need to protect the sort of the core values of the system that we have today. And in that respect, as I said, it's been such a privilege to work together with Mexico. We share all these fundamental values, despite the geographical distance. And we, as Norway, as a small country, Mexico as a much bigger one, being in another part of the world. And I think, as I discussed with Jennifer this morning, the fact that Norway is now also a guest country of G20, and I think also in that setting and in G20, which is also very important, what you call it, not an organization, I suppose, but a group of countries, that a forum that really could make a difference. And we are very happy also within that context to work together with Mexico.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give the floor to Minister Jennifer Feller, but first I'm going to read her CV. Jennifer Feller, my colleague, is a member of the Mexican Foreign Service since 2003. She holds the rank of Minister of the Foreign Service in September 2022. She is currently the Director General for Europe and Mexico's G20 Sherpa. Previously, she served as Acting Deputy Foreign Minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico, Director General of Political Planning and G20 at the Deputy Foreign Ministry, Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassies of Mexico in Portugal and in France, Head of the Political Affairs Division at the Embassy of Mexico in the United States of America, Chief of Staff to the Ambassador of Mexico to the USA, Head of the Political and Consular Affairs Section at the Embassy of Mexico in Portugal, among other things, because it's a long CV. Jennifer Feller is a graduate of international relations, specialized in international law at the Iberoamericana University. She completed postgraduate courses in political science and international relations at the Center for Economic Research and Teaching, Sede. She recently became a postgraduate from the University Institute of Lisbon in Portugal after completing a master in humanitarian assistance. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Ambassador Aschentrup, for hosting us here. And he didn't mention it, but Ambassador Aschentrup was my boss at some point in Portugal. So it's an honor to be here and to be with you, Mona, and Damián Martínez. I was telling Mona this morning when we met that she has a huge fan club here in Mexico because, as I have said several times before, institutions and national positions are always very important, but the people make a difference, and Mona has made a huge difference as in all of the posts that were mentioned, but also in the amazing coordination and cooperation that was held by Mexico and Norway during our non-permanent membership in the UN Security Council. So thank you very much. I think something that I have to say is we always we human beings, we tend to say always, it has never been like that. We had never been in this very terrible situation. But the truth is that maybe it's the saddest thing that we have been already as polarized as we are now, and we know already what the result of the polarization will be. And I think that is the sad part in a sense, because we know where we are heading to, but at the same time, there is huge hope because that polarization already existed. It's because that lack of empathy already existed among nations, that we, people passionate about diplomacy, exist. We know that there is another way. We know that polarization is not only, and I was mentioning this also this morning, I think that something that for me personally, it's very concerning, is that when you look at the news and when you look into the issue of Ukraine, or you look into the issue of Middle East, without mentioning all of the conflicts that also exist at the same time, in Yemen, in Congo, in several other parts of the world that are really, to be really frank, rarely mentioned. We all, the parts that are playing a role in these conflicts or in these wars, they are obsessed about how to win the war. But very few people are thinking about how to achieve peace. And I think that is the main point where we have to get back to, now that we know what polarization can make to the world, what polarization can make to our governments, but most of all, what polarization can do to our societies. The human suffering, the poverty, the inequality, all of the things that are now causing, a huge, not only at the social level, the impact at the social level of climate change, of the violation of human rights, for instance, in general. I'm not talking only about war, but about our daily life. How these issues are not tackled in the right way because we are thinking about things that are not really important, if I may say so. There are concepts in our daily life that don't mean anymore the same thing as they did before. Democracy, human rights, peace and security, even the link between our governments and the society is broken as well, because there is no, we will talk maybe later about that, but why the extreme right is advancing in some countries. It is not only, not because of, I don't think it's because of an ideological thing. It's because we don't feel safe anymore. Societies don't feel safe anymore. And political parties are taking more and more advantage of this insecurity in order to take on flags like migration, like the threat of war, to justify that we cannot trust anymore the traditional systems that we have built. And this is also applicable to the multilateral system. Countries like Norway and Mexico have worked for years to strengthen this rule-based order and this international law structure because it's part of our national security. We build it in order to have predictability. We build it to have mechanisms to go to in cases of war or threats, or to be able to sit together and see the way to agree on how to tackle challenges as climate change. But the truth is that this system is not working anymore. It is not adapted to reality. We had that meeting also and a conversation with Vice Minister Hernandez this morning about that. The system is not working anymore. It's not adaptable because it's a system that was built in 1945. But we also, throughout all of these years, we have common challenges, but at the same time, we have become so individualistic that we have lost the possibility of listening to each other. So there is no empathy. Maybe this was exacerbated by the pandemic because we're all so, you were forced to actually to not think about what was around, but to actually see what was inside of our countries, what was the problem with our health system. And the big contradiction of that is that we lost the capability of seeing how important international cooperation was at that moment. And several countries closed their borders. There was even some protectionism on vaccines, etc. And the inequalities that have been there for a long time, the speech of moral authority from the West to the South, which had also an impact, the issue of not being able to listening to each other had a huge toll on the functioning of the everyday mechanisms that we have built for so many years. So maybe just to close down this reflection, we have been polarized before. The polarization nowadays faces new threats that were not there before. We have a war in Europe, an invasion in Europe for the first time since the Second World War. We have new challenges, artificial intelligence, misinformation that actually exacerbates our divisions. We have the possibility more and more of local or regional conflicts to get more, to get global, because they have an impact not only on the trust that I was talking before, but they have an impact in our economies. They have an impact on the set of values that we have set. If I may repeat, for our own security, for our national confidence, there is a mistrust that is there. And it is very, just to think also analytically, it is very tempting to divide this polarization between the West and the global South. But it is true also that it's not that simple as it sounds, because the rivalries are not only between two blocs. If you think about, for instance, the relationship between China and India, if you think about the divisions within Latin America, the divisions in Africa, the divisions in Europe, when you can see the debate on the Middle East in Europe, you can see how many differences and disagreements there are on the basic concepts, as if there is a war in the Middle East, or if there is not, or if that cannot be labeled as a war. So I think that whatever we can do as Norway and Mexico, which we are countries that are believers in this multilateral system. We believe that we have to reform the multilateral system, but we have to pose the right questions, how we can actually reform this system. How can we make diplomacy prevail over realpolitik or over military strength? How can we build a partnership that actually gets beyond the natural partnership or alliances, regional alliances, or Western or South alliances? That is a question that I think we should ask in order to be able to surpass this very challenging moment right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now I'm going to give the floor to Damián, but I'm going to read his CV. Damián Martínez Tagüeña is Senior Fellow at the Mexican Council on Foreign Relations, COMEXI, and a Managing Director in FTI Consulting's Strategic Communications offering. Before that, he served for nearly 20 years at the Mexican Foreign Service, including as Chief of Staff for the Deputy Minister and G20 Sous Sherpa, Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN organizations based in Vienna, and General Consul in Hong Kong. And I have to add that both of them were my students here, and later they were my chiefs recently here at the Foreign Affairs Ministry. That's the circle of life.
Yeah.
Okay, Damián, please.
That's a foreign service to you. So first, it's a great pleasure to be here with all of you. It's a great pleasure, and I must say, on the eve of International Women's Day, to share the stage with two distinguished professionals who every day prove that of the benefits for both men and women of having women not only active participants in diplomacy, but actually leading the way. So I'm very honored to be with you this evening. And I'm very happy for the opportunity to do three things that I barely get to do anymore, which is talk to people who already know that diplomacy is more than going to cocktails. I think that's good. Obviously, to meet with old friends, and the third one is to wear a suit and tie, which I never do anymore. So it's a happy development. And what I'm trying to bring to the panel is some of the insights gathered from the time away from diplomacy, working with the private sector, in which I've been working mostly in communications and public affairs and advocacy on a wide variety of issues. And there, it's very common for companies to feel the same anxiety that we feel from as government officials or general audiences, because polarization obviously matters for the economy as a whole, but I think a new feature now is that it matters individually for companies, not as part of what's going to happen with the GDP, but as what should I do? And they ask us many times, so what can I do that is kosher or halal, because it's important to be inclusive on your metaphors. And it's very difficult to answer that question, because most often than not, nothing is really neither kosher nor halal. There's a risk associated to everything. There's a risk to not doing anything. There's a risk to just staying quiet. And I think that is new. So polarization isn't, but this need to be out there and to show your face and to be aware that there's a consequences for what you do and what you don't do, I think that is new. And the reason for that is that when you cannot say what is safe to do, that reflects that there are consensus within society of what is acceptable. These things we call, principles or interests or whatever, is no longer there in most countries. So in most countries, we've seen the center of the political spectrum severely weakened. And in others, we've seen it outright collapse. And that makes things so much different than if you can assume that you have at least the basis on which to work with. And I put this on the table not because I'm a pessimist, although I am. I put this on the table because I think this represents an added challenge for governments that are looking to find a way out of this polarization or contribute to an end of polarization. And it actually represents two major challenges. One, which I think is more discussed, is the need to look beyond the government and into society when you're trying to find a way forward. It doesn't matter if you have a deal with the government of X, and X can be truly any country of the world. If that deal is not going to be popular in X, that deal is going to be very short-lived. If it's not tied to an agenda, a positive agenda, that allows people to get behind the deal, that deal is not going to last. So you need to look beyond governments. You need to play on a different level. And I think there's some general awareness of that. The one that I think it's less obvious is that you have to do that at home as well. Because supporting the efforts of your diplomatic corps to go out there and try to make a difference is no longer a given. I think there's some spending to be done. There's some officials to be trained. There's some missions to be maintained. And there's a lot of patient work that will fail 9 out of 10 times, that will make a little bit of a difference, maybe that 10, and that will be spectacular 1 in a million. But we're all chasing that 1 in a million, right? So how do you explain this to society? How do you take this in stride? How do you avoid the temptation of doing Instagram diplomacy, which never works? So I think these are issues that we need to discuss and be fully aware of it. And the more that we have a conversation about this, the more we can connect to what's on the mind of the other actors beyond government. And I think being more effective as we try to find the path towards a more workable international system. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Damián. Now I'm going to ask the first question to Ambassador Juul, but you almost answered my first question. But well, I'm going to ask you the question. You have a long experience in multilateral foreign ambassador. So I would like to ask you, in what areas of the multilateral arena can Mexico and Norway cooperate to resolve some of the current problems we are facing now? You work very closely with Mexican diplomats, and I suppose you know us very well. So please tell us.
Yeah, no, exactly like you said. I think we have already proved that the partnership between Mexico and Norway is really a very special one. And I think together we need to reach out, like Jennifer referred to, also to make more partnership with other like-minded countries, and to reach out to countries that we might sort of share, I mean, these sort of fundamental values of democracy, human rights. I mean, find a way to make sure that these fundamental values of a rule-based order is not being undermined. And I think both in the Security Council, I think both Mexico and Norway proved that we were able to work with all members of the council, being it also among the so-called P5s, the permanent five. So I think both Norway and Mexico were able, even in very critical times after the war in Ukraine, that we were able to reach out both to countries like even to Russia, if I may say so, and especially for us as a NATO member, as a Western country, we saw the need for reaching out and negotiate and discuss with our Russian colleagues in order to not to have a paralyzed Security Council on all the other issues on the Council's agenda. I think also that there is, and we saw that in the UN when it came to the resolution condemning the Russian invasion, that it was actually more than 140 countries voting for that, which shows that there is quite, if not a consensus, but quite a strong adherence to these fundamental laws of international cooperation and a condemnation of the violation of the UN Charter, because the UN Charter is important for all of us to adhere to. And making partnerships like I said initially with countries that are like-minded, but at the same time also are in a different situation, in a different position, and listen. And that is, again, referring to being a good diplomat and using the diplomatic tools that we have is about sort of listening to other countries. I mean, being open for their concern. And I think the role that both Mexico and Norway plays in the UN, in the G20 with Jennifer as the Sherpa, I think we really can make a difference now, because there is, I mean, we have to not let this increased polarization, I mean, get us to a stage where it really is very little room left for that kind of diplomacy. And we know, like Jennifer said, we know what the alternative is. We see that in Ukraine, we see that in the Middle East, and we need to continue to work on that, and to get more country, not to convince them, but to have that conversation.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I was thinking over, you should have obtained the Nobel Prize by the end of the 20th century. Really, your work there was very, very important in those years for the peace process in the Middle East. And my question is the following. You have a long experience in this kind of negotiations, and to what extent we could think about a new peace process between Israel and Palestine now that we are eyewitnessing this terrible crisis in the Gaza Strip?
So it's a very pertinent question these days, and something that we see now. I mean, it's the whole world is preoccupied with this drama that is being played out in the Middle East, and particularly, of course, in Gaza, with now more than 30,000 people being killed and thousands being injured. I mean, we have always said that there have always been crises in the Middle East, but we always said it cannot get worse, but it's always get worse and worse. And I think we are now at a point where I think now I think it can't get worse, because it really is so bad. And if there is one sort of positive thing, it's hard to use that word in such a situation, but one of the things that I think will come out of this terrible war is that a realization on all sides, I think, both internationally, in the Arab world, in the US, in Europe, among the Arab states, as I said, that these conflicts need to be tackled, needs to be, we need to find a way out of this contracted conflict and support the Palestinian right of self-determination. And another sort of thing that we see now is that also almost the whole world support the two-state solution. I mean, that it has never been as expressed by countries throughout the world in the Security Council, the US as well, and in the Arab world. And I think we now see that we cannot sort of just leave that conflict aside. We cannot go back to some kind of status quo that has been the case, that for decades now, this conflict has not been really tackled in a way that is so desperately needed in order to avoid another war of this kind. And I think it's still possible. What is also a good thing now, I think, is, as I said, also in the Arab world, they are now getting involved in that conflict in another way that has been before. I mean, they have always supported, at least orally, or some will say just paying lip service to the support to the Palestinian, but not getting really engaged in the search for a solution. Now we see that for instance, this Arab Peace Institute, the Arab Peace Initiative from back in the early 2000 is now getting more attraction, and countries like Saudi Arabia and others are saying there is no way that there can be any kind of normalization between Saudi and Israel without a solution to the Palestinian issue. And we see a much more active also US administration getting involved and to a greater extent putting pressure on Israel, both on the need for a humanitarian ceasefire that we have been calling from the very beginning of this conflict. And we see an internal pressure, a sort of a grassroots pressure in countries like the US and in Europe, and I think you have it here as well. I mean, I think it's maybe the only conflict in the world that get that kind of attraction and engagement around the world. And I hope we can capitalize on that and renew our effort to bring this conflict into a negotiating track where the outcome should be a two-state solution.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now to Jennifer, you mentioned something which is completely true. The world out there is very scary. I mean, there is the feeling of a permanent crisis, the feeling of an emptiness, that the big players are not able to establish a minimum governance in the world affairs. So what can we do? How can we start a reform of the global governance in order to give viability to the international world and to resolve little by little some of the crises that we are facing there? Thank you.
First, I think that like I was saying before, no, we have to be able to adapt this multilateral system to our needs. And the truth is that, and this is something that I will also borrow from Vice Minister Juul Hernandez, is that we have an overloaded multilateral system, an overloaded global governance. Instead of going back to basics, we think that the more we have, the more initiatives we have, the more groups we have, the more mechanisms we have, we will be able to get to a solution. But this is also pretty linked to what Damián was saying about the Instagram diplomacy. We have to be out there. There has to be an initiative that comes from Mexico. There has to be an initiative that comes from Africa. And we have lost in that path of this need of visibility, the importance of diplomacy in corridors, which is the one that I really like. So I think I remember when we were in the pandemic, you know, it was so easy to say, oh, okay, we don't have to travel anymore. We can do everything through Zoom. But the truth is that diplomacy is not something that we can do in Zoom. Like we must have this personal contact. We must have the capacity as diplomats to engage with the other part. And Mona mentioned this very important issue. How can we solve a war? How can we be able to make the multilateral system work if we don't talk to each other? So I understand that if there is a war, that the presidents don't talk to each other. That I understand. I understand that if we're going to make a national statement, that we say how we feel about something and that we can state the values. But we diplomats on the ground, we have to be able to continue talking. We have to be able to continue speaking. Otherwise, there is nothing that we can be able to achieve. So Norway and Mexico spoke to Russia in the UN Security Council, and that's why we were able also to advance on several initiatives, including agreements on Ukraine. There were Sherpas in the G20 in Bali, both from the G7 and from the emerging markets, that were able to speak to Russia. And that's how we achieved a consensus in Bali on Ukraine and Russia, condemning the invasion with Russia on board of the consensus. If we didn't talk at that moment with each other, the G20 would be already an urban legend. So what is not working in the multilateral system? The UN Security Council is not working clearly. If we are not able even to agree, or the P5 is not even able to agree on the need on a ceasefire in Gaza with 30,000 people, civilians, not soldiers, civilians being killed. If the Security Council is not able to even do that anymore, then clearly there is a need to reform. And again, I go back to where we are focusing on. Are we focusing on the permanent membership of new states in the Security Council? Before getting into that, before getting into very specific individual interests, we have to speak about the methods of work of the UN Security Council. We have to speak about the responsibility of the P5 on what they are doing to the multilateral system that we have built. And we have, I was telling this to Mona as well this morning. When I went to a meeting for the first time in the G20, for me it was like very, very curious, because basically, if you have, I mean, it's not politically correct. The people that know me know that I'm not politically correct. So I'm just going to say, because it's not something like these groups of countries, they don't like sometimes to be labeled. But in the G20, you have basically the G7, you have the BRICS, and you have what we know as MICTA. And something that was very, very, very surprising for me is that if a country of the G7 speaks and says, I don't know, an initiative, anything, you have immediately all of the rest of the G7 taking the floor to support the initiative of this country of the G7. If you have a country from Latin America speaking and saying something, a proposal for the text, you have normally the other Latin Americans supporting, normally. That's why I say normally. And if you have an Arab state speaking, you normally have the rest. So in what moment did we fall into that trap? Why are we not able to support the initiatives that sound constructive for us? Why cannot I support the proposal of Germany or of China without being labeled as you are in this block? So that is one of the dynamics that we have to change in the global governance. We have to change these dynamics of what block are we part of. The multilateral governance, the global governance has to be representative. the Bretton Woods institutions, the Security Council, the way other mechanisms work, they have to be representative. We have to be able to be empathic. Again, we have to be able to listen to each other. And we have to be able to create again, to build together again, the trust on values and principles that we share. When we spoke for the first time, when I got from my office the first démarche on Ukraine in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the countries that made the démarche on the other end, they said, we have to unite against autocracy and be able to defend democracy. And I was listening to that phrase, and I immediately didn't feel related to it. And it's not because I don't think that Mexico is a democracy, or that I don't feel that we share the values of democracy. It's because Mexico, not necessarily yesterday, but other countries as well, of the region, have been invaded in the name of democracy. We have also, I was part of the exercise 12 years ago. Again, I think, I don't know if it's 20, I still feel that it's 12. The exercise within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when Mexico decided to ratify all of the human rights conventions that were still in the drawer, because we believed that these conventions, once they will be ratified, they would actually make a difference at the national level. We would use our obligations in the international level in order to be able to tackle our challenges in the human rights. And I remember that we ratified, we were all already committed, and then there was one very important NGO, human rights NGO, that came. We organized a super ambitious agenda. They had meetings with the Ministry of Defense. They had meetings with several top-level public servants here in Mexico. They left. They didn't even say thank you. And they did a terrible report on the country. And, I remember that when we saw that diagnosis, I said, okay, we take that report, we take those recommendations, but really, what would have happened if Mexico hadn't ratified and hadn't opened the door for these visits to take place? And what you have is also a double standard in those issues, because countries that have not ratified the conventions, they close the door, they don't receive anyone, and they are not, they are not taking these reports as in a terrible manner as sometimes we do, and it's not, Mexico hasn't stopped its commitment to human rights. It's not about that, but it's about the political use of human rights. Why political and civil rights are more important than social rights. I've never seen a démarche on social rights. I've seen many démarches on political rights. So these are the things, I'm sorry, I don't want to be very, super lengthy, but these are the things that we have to think about. How our commitment on human rights, our commitment to democracy, our commitment to the multilateral system has to go back to basics. Why are we together? Why did we decide to embark on this? And in this sense, we have to I think, to work towards that direction. Otherwise, the polarization will continue to be wider. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very interesting your words about this. Now, my second question, Jennifer, to you: half of the world population will go to the ballots this year. We have already seen elections in Argentina, in El Salvador, in a couple of countries, but well, there will be more elections this year. The mother of all the elections, of course, will be the elections there with our neighbor, and that will be very important. So there is also this advance of the extreme rights and the extreme left that contribute to the polarization of the world. I would like to listen to you. What do you think about all this and the role of these movements, extreme movements, and the elections that could could insist on a polarized world?
Okay, I promise I will be brief. I thought that was only one question. No, there are around. I mean, this year is going to be marked also by that subject. Thank you, Ambassador Ashentrup. There are around 76 elections this year. I think it's a more or less 4 billion voters in the world. Yeah. So of course the United States election will have most of the media attention because it will have an impact again on polarization, on financing allocated to the multilateral system, and also on the wider I don't know I think division between the concepts that we see in the multilateral sphere right now. I think that what we are seeing, but of course we have the process, the election process in the European Union, which will be also very important for the future of the strategy of the region, of course in Ukraine, but in the rest of the world. And I'm just going to go back to what I was saying in the introduction, which is how the advancement of extreme ideologies within the political sphere is explained. So why, if Europeans, for instance, know what the extreme right or the extreme left for that purpose as well, what historically has been the impact of these kind of ideologies within the region, is why they are why these parties are again gaining space and strength, and I go back to this separation or division or lack of understanding between society and governments. And I think that's something that we have made the mistake, and this is applicable to everybody, is that we lost track on how important it was to actually invest in, again, the well-being of society, poverty, inequality, of course, social rights, but how climate change impacts us every day. And something that, for instance, in the climate change debate surprises me is that when in the G20, whenever we sit and we negotiate about climate change, it feels like we are in a competition, no? Who is better in promising what is the objective in 2030? No, we have to be there. We have to be completely green in 2050. And of course, it's a very important subject, and it is a very important goal. And I think we all are empathetic about it. But what is the impact of these kind of policies in the people every day? And you could see that in the demonstrations of agriculture, sorry. Exactly. Thank you. In Europe, because it is true that there is an impact on people. Mexico, whenever we think about phasing out of fossil fuels, which is, I think there is a commitment from Mexico to actually do that, but we cannot do all of these steps in such a quick manner that we would not think about the employment of all the people that depend on the fossil fuels industry. So whenever you have, this division or this lack of alignment between the needs of the people, and then you use nationalism as the preferred political tool. So you think about, migration as a threat, how external factors are the ones who are actually having an impact on our everyday life. Then you also lose track of the core issues, Because it's true, migration can be a huge challenge, but it can be also something positive. And when you cannot see that anymore, and that you are conditioned by social media, by the impossibility, we have lost the possibility also, I think, as societies to actually be able to analyze, to take time to not read only the headers of the articles, but to actually to get informed and to read what the opposition is thinking. I had a boss that told me once, if you read only things that you like, then you are doing a bad job. You have to read what the others are thinking in order to be able to combat them later. And I think that, I mean, the huge challenge for polarization starts, as also Damián was saying before, in our homes. It's not only about the big substantive philosophical thinking of us diplomats. It's about what we can connect what we do every day to the well-being of the people out there that don't know really what is happening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. To Damián. Damián, if I remember well, you mentioned something also about the role of the private sector in the current situation. No question about it. It is very clear that the private sector has a play to role. We have seen, just as an example, the role of the big techs in the war in Ukraine. Microsoft, Google, Twitter, Internet, all these big techs are playing an important role in that war. And I don't know if they can have a role also in alleviate this polarization. There is a new space where they are acting and they are sovereign, the cyberspace, where the nation state has no sovereignty. The nation state has sovereignty in land, air, and sea, but this new space are the private sector, the big techs. So how can we build bridges, or the private sector can be bridges among blocks, among countries in the current situation?
I mean, they're sovereign, but they still get to receive the tax collectors. So I don't think they're quite as sovereign as that. So I think, yeah, I mean, there's obviously a role to be played there, and perhaps to go a step back into how do you break this deadlock? And I think we generally tend to see diplomacy on two levels, right? So the day-to-day things that we all do, well, I don't, but you all do. In you negotiate a resolution, or you hold a trade mission or whatever. And we tend to think that that's sort of the implementation phase, and that doesn't really change the overall dynamic. And then you have the, the foreign policy with the capital letters, and that's sort of what shapes the international environment. And I think there's some misconception there, because we tend to think that that's sort of where the macro things are done, and that's sort of the big thing. And we forget that the micro things can change the world as well, and that matters. And that's how we got the Oslo process, and that's how we got the Treaty of Tlatelolco here in Mexico, or the Caso Avena, or whatever, so many other examples. But the same is true above. We tend to think that we have to think big to do big, and it's not really the case. So I understand the discussion about the need to reform the multilateral system, but if we're betting on that to solve our problems, we're doomed, because that is not going to happen. I think we need to see that also from a step-by-step, day-to-day way of building things. And that sends very strong signals that the private sector seizes and acts upon. So I would argue that, for instance, the initiative to negotiate a plastic waste treaty, I don't know where that's going to land. Hopefully it will land a place where we don't get plastic bottles in a member of the High Ambition Coalition. But anyway, I don't know where that's going to land, but businesses have taken note, and businesses are already planning for the next 10 years now, and they're taking investment decisions, and that's moving the needle already. So that's a very powerful tool that we need to take, and it doesn't take a giant macro deal. It doesn't take rewriting the UN Charter. It just takes steady work. So I also was at G20 before you, and I divided in my head the group slightly differently, and I can say it because I'm no longer there. On every given topic, I would say, these are the countries that care about X, these are the countries that care about the opposite of X, and these are the countries that don't care. And I'm going to qualify that. that don't care as long as it's a deal. And in every topic but one, which at least in my time was immigration, we were in the group, we don't care as long as there's a deal. Because there's very little, there's no way that a deal on climate that works from Russia and China and the EU and India doesn't work for Mexico. It works. So what is our role in that configuration? To get the deal done. And to get one deal done, and then to get 2 deals done, and then to get 3, and then get 4. And that's where we work with Norway. Like we work with Norway on the CCPCJ in Vienna. Like you were chairing, we were vice chairs. No, we were chairing and you had the cow. We got every resolution through because the only thing we care about was getting the resolutions through and getting resolutions that make sense. So that sends strong signals, that moves the needle, and that gets things done. And that's what we should be focusing on. So, I mean, good luck also reforming the UN Security Council.
That's the private sector.
Thank you very much. I had a second question for you, but please forgive me, Damián, but we are running out of time.
I don't want to.
And I would like to,
Okay.
I received some questions from the public because Ambassador Juul has to leave at 6:30. I remember you told me that. So I'm going to read a couple of questions from the public. And there is one here that it is very interesting. Tomorrow will be International Women's Day. So there is a question that says, on the occasion of International Women's Day, could you give us a few words for all women diplomats around the world? And before responding to that, I would like to say something. I remember when I was posted in Brussels one day, and a German Europarlamentarian told me, listen, Herman, if instead of having the Lehman Brothers, we had the Lehman Sisters, this terrible financial crisis that happened in 28, 29, never happened. So, and I was wondering, and I am sure she was right with that. So, please.
I think it's I was told from our excellent ambassador here that also here in Mexico City there is this big rally coming up tomorrow, and I can assure you that this is also so there's another thing that we shared, and because I was in Norway, 8th of March is a big day where not only women but also men come out in the streets and make sure that we are continuing to insist that we have still a lot of work to be done, both domestically, I would say, even in a country like Norway. I think we have come a long way, but there are certainly still very much work to be done, and I'm sure in Mexico as well. So not only diplomats, but I hope most women will mobilize tomorrow, because what we also see internationally, and speaking about the multilateral system as well in the UN and other places, I think we are experiencing a little bit of a pushback on gender issue and equal rights for women and girls. There are and the Secretary General used the phrase, we have to push back the pushback, and I think that is very correct, because we cannot be complacent saying that now we have done, I mean, a lot of progress. We have gender parity in the UN almost, but it's not about having more women in positions or in politics or whatever, but we need to look at what women are being exposed to in all parts of the world. And for instance, when it comes to sexual violence and abuse, domestic violence, sexual violence and abuse being used as weapon of wars. We see it now in Ukraine, we see it in the Middle East, in Israel and in Gaza, and we need not to be complacent at all, because women are so much still being victimized in a way that is completely unacceptable. And as I said, a lot of more work needs to be done. And as women diplomats, I think that I don't think that it's only we who are passionate believer in passionate diplomacy, but I think we bring to the table in peace negotiations, in discussions where we meet colleagues around the world, and in the UN now, the Women's Commission is coming out, where women and men from all around the world come together in order to make sure that we are not slipping on this issue. And that is also relating now to this summit of the future that will come up in the fall in the UN, and the pact of the future. And we see some forces now working sort of against the progress, and wants to sort of to push back on some of those issues, and that we really have to stand up against, both as women and men.
Jennifer, something to say?
Very quickly, just to say that I have a boy and a girl at home. They both are pretty small still, and my daughter is the eldest, and when she was born, it was quite easy for me, you know, to bet on her empowerment, on her security, and to have, you know, a non how do you say that, role associated education for her. And when my boy was born, I have to say it was a lot more difficult, because we have come to a place where we have a lot of feminism, empowerment. We have a lot of things that are out there, but we haven't been able of actually also creating a role model for men to be associated with this feminism and with this women empowerment. So there is a need for us to work on how to include men in this women empowerment movement. And this goes through what Mona was saying, which is we are different from men, and we do have a different approach to things, including diplomacy. And we are facing a lot of challenges. But whenever you go to the CSW, I don't know if it's still there, but I remember, you know, when I was in New York, and I would go to the CSW, or I would go to the Beijing review process, you would enter the room and there were like 10,000 women and maybe 1 or 2 men. If you would go to disarmament, then there would be 10,000 men and 2 women. And if you were there as a woman, it was not easy. So as diplomats and women diplomats, we have to be able to support women, yes. We have to be able to protect what we have achieved, because it's true, there is a backlash. But we have to be able at some point to make believe, as much as we do, men, on how important it is that we are there, and that we, as our Minister of Foreign Affairs says, and I love her when she says that, we don't want to take power away from men. We want power, but that's it. So the day that we see a panel and that it's not important to, oh my God, there are 5 men there, we have to include a woman, please look very quickly for one in order to have a balance, and this exercise will be normal, then we will achieve. We would achieve something.
Thank you. Do you want to say something about that?
No, I do have 2 things to say. Like, I think the most pathetic thing that you get to hear sometimes is like, well, you have to be a feminist because you think, what do you think of your daughter, right? And actually, I think a powerful way of getting empathy is thinking more in terms of, like, I also have a daughter and a son. Like, which world would I like my son to grow up in terms of gender, in terms of inclusion, and in terms of diversity? Because it's certainly not the world that I grew up in. I think we have to move in that direction. So that would be point number one. And point number two is, and this is something that you have to work with, Herman, some homework for you, is that I think foreign services have to be much more representative of their societies they claim to represent. So in Mexico, we've moved forward in terms of gender, but we're still all from 5 universities, and we're still 90% from the Mexican Foreign Service. Even the ones that are on leave are from the same universities like me. So I think it's a matter of getting as broader coverage you can have, and that helps you close the gap, and that helps you close polarization, and that helps you get deals.
Yes, thank you. Well, another question, there is still time from the German embassy. Is not one reason of polarization the widening gap between global elites and everyday experiences of locally rooted people and the exploitation of this gap by demagogues? I repeat, this is not one reason of polarization, the widening gap between global elites and everyday experiences of locally rooted people and the exploitation of this gap by demagogues? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, there is a widening gap not only among countries, but inside the countries in terms of wealth. That is clear. And so for that reason, the world is very polarized too.
Yeah. So I know nobody really wants to, I'm not the main show here, but just one thought. I think, Jennifer, you hit it on the head when you said you have to read what the other people say, but the way that the media outlet ecosystem is shaped now, you only follow the people you know on Twitter or whatever social media, and everything is behind paywalls, and you only pay a limited number of subscriptions. So you pick whatever you think is valuable, and you reinforce your own biases. So yeah, there's a growing gap between what you think is and what it actually is. And that's a systemic issue, and that's something that we have to break through.
Yeah, and I think that is related to the rise of sort of populism and even to conspiracy theories and the disagreement on what are facts these days. And we know that, of course, I mean, social media plays a role here. And I think the widening of the gap domestically in countries like we see in many countries, also in Europe for sure. We see it in the US. I will not say anything about Mexico on this, but that is something that of course makes this it adds to this perceived polarization. And again, that's why it's so important that we can meet and talk and have dialogue sort of physically, instead of all now the communication goes through the digital sphere, and it's so much more difficult to confront and to have this discussion when it's sort of is being sort of poured out in the social media, rather than we sit down and talk and try to find a way.
Well, probably the last one. Well, this is interesting. Regarding Mexico's internal politics, will that change of government affect or strengthen relations between Norway and Mexico? Why? Ambassador.
I think that I mean, we have had in Mexico like several changes of parties in power, and I think that we are at that stage where we know what is the value added of the Mexican foreign policy. And the value added of the Mexican foreign policy, I remember when we left the G77, and then there was this debate, no? What is Mexico going to do if it's not part of the G77? And we had to rebuild the concept of our foreign policy out of that group. And the decision was basically what Damián was saying, Armona was saying, or what defines Norway and Mexico in out there in our foreign policies. I remember now when you were saying, that Mexico is one of the countries that doesn't care in the G20. I remember last year I was talking with my Indian colleague, and I said to him, listen, Mexico has very few red lines, no? Because we are constructive. So if Mexico has a red line, you have to listen to us. And he took that very much into account. And at some point I said, this is a red line for Mexico, and he really took it. But that's define us. I mean, Norway and Mexico, we work together to build, not to destruct. And I think that is why it doesn't matter what government is in place, hopefully. What government is in place in the future, not only now, but in the future, that Norway and Mexico will always be able to relate because we build.
Very elegant answer. Yeah. Okay. No, but one more. Okay. Okay. The next one. This is from the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. It's a woman from the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. What could we do as society to make a change besides do not lose our values? Repeat. I repeat. What could we do as society to make a change besides do not lose our values? To think again collectively. We have been thinking individually and with consumism in the last 30 years. We have to go back to think collectively. I mean, please.
No, and I think that's the core of what we've been discussing here today. I mean, how do we manage to sort of to stick with our fundamental core values while they are being challenged in this world that we are living in on so many fronts and for so many reasons. But again, I mean, I think the simple answer is again that we need to partner up and to stick together and use our tools that we have as diplomats, but as civil society and as politicians or whatever, to address those fundamental issues and to talk about them. And I think then we will realize that it is in our common interest to stick to them and to sort of to face off that kind of challenge that we see, being it from the left and right, being is, I mean, in conspiracy theories, in a populist trend that you now see around the world, which is about to undermine these fundamental values that are so important for us.
I want to say that because I am normally very passionate, and I have been having sometimes people that tells me that this is not good for a diplomat to be. That as a society, not as a diplomat, as a society, and I include myself in that society, we should never allow us not to be affected by injustice. I know it sounds very world peace speech, but exact, kumbaya. But I think that we won't be able to make a difference from wherever we are, academy, private sector, diplomacy, if we just, ignore or are completely numb to the numbers of people that are being killed or suffer from hunger or whatever out there. So it's important to keep our values, but it's also important to be able to be frustrated and to feel indignation and to feel that we should do more to change things. This is the only way we will be able actually to make a difference. So tomorrow, for instance, when there is this march that has become so symbolic in Mexico, we are changing things because we are outraged by the injustice that is committed, and this should be applicable to every subject that we deal with every day. That's the last question.
So I'm going to finish with the first joke that I started with. Is my stand-up set. So I think the other thing you can do is, and just by being here, I think you realize the importance of that foreign policy and diplomacy can make. I mean, Mexico is a country that among the OECD countries, we have the highest share of exports as a share of GDP. We have 20% of our population living abroad. And yet, nobody cares about foreign policy. I mean, it's really not an issue. We dedicate maybe 5 minutes in the presidential debate to it. That's about it. So I think a greater awareness of the fact that diplomacy is not only going to cocktails and having Ferrero Rochers would be the first step to take. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you. And we finish here. Thank you. We have had here 3 very smart persons, and thank you. Applause.